And that's the trouble between the Sunnis and Shias. It isn't anything today present in terms of their belief. Now, these have been made much worse in Iraq by the fact that the British gave the Sunnis, who were far fewer, about half as many as there were Shia, gave the Sunnis the ability to rule Iraq from 1922 until Saddam, and until we came. And the Shias were over 60%. But the Sunnis actually rule. So there's a lot of anger about that, and there was a lot of misbehavior. But that's an important thing to remember, the business of the Middle East. Now, there's one other thing that you need to understand if you're going to understand the Middle East. For 300 to 400 years, we in the West have been trying to become more and more individualistic. Part of the whole rational movement in the West is that each individual is responsible for himself. But in most of the world, people don't think first of themselves. They think first of their family. Extended family, clan, and milde. So they will immediately, when I went to the Middle East in 1950 first, I went out to teach first in 1950, I would ask a person, what is your watan? What is your nationality? And they would answer Sunni, Shia, Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, whatever. They didn't answer Syrian, Jordanian, Palestinian, Lebanese. Now, in the last few years, they tend now to answer Jordanian, Syrian, because that's all a new idea. So, individual identity versus group identity. Now, this is not absolute. We're not complete individualistic, and they're not complete group-oriented. But there's a sort of a sliding scale there. And we're much more individualistic, and they're much more group identity. So keep the group identity in mind. You often wonder, how can anyone commit suicide? Well, if your purpose in life is to give honor to your family, not to yourself, but to your family, by committing suicide or by doing something that's considered by the community admirable, you can raise your status of your whole group very quickly by committing suicide. You may spend a whole life trying to do something good for the community and may not do as much. So that makes it a little more possible to commit suicide than if you're an individualist. If you're an individualist, you're the only one you've got. You certainly don't want to get rid of yourself. But if you don't think of yourself as the main purpose in life, the main identity, but your group, it's a little easier to commit suicide. But I might remind you that there have been suiciders in Islam only twice in history. Once the Hashashin, the people who smoked hashish and then were sent out to kill people, that's where the word assassin comes from, Hashashin, people who smoked hashish. That was in the time of the Crusades. And today, because of the petroleum, is the other time that they've begun to do this assassination by suicide. And both times, the Muslims have killed more fellow Muslims than they've killed foreigners. Keep that in mind. But you must go back now to talk about this business of identity and community. This is something that we don't have. So we need to know about the Ottomans, that they ruled through other people and that they ruled through the milde. And so that every community had a sense of identity, but it was not a geographic identity. And so in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia, under Tito, who was very tough, they could keep everybody together. But once Tito went, there were no Turks and no Tito to control, so the Orthodox and the Catholics and the Muslims got at it. And it's interesting to note that about 9/10 of the Muslims in the Balkans are converts. They are not Turks. They were people with exactly the same DNA as the Catholics and the Orthodox, which makes it even stranger. But you see, the trouble we had in the Balkans and the trouble we're having in the Arab world, it has to do with you cannot separate these people because they may be living in the same apartment building. When Jerusalem when the Jews tried to take over Jerusalem, there were Armenians and there were Christians and there were Muslims and there were all these different people, all living in the same communities, same neighborhoods. And one of the big jobs that had to be done was to get people to move to other neighborhoods. But this is just not possible to do in an area as large as the Middle East. Now, one of the sad things that's happening, Palestine was 20% Christian at 1948. It's less than 2.5% now. Almost all the Christians have emigrated. Egypt is still 20% Christian. Iraq, about 5% Christian. Lebanon, about 40% Christian. And Turkey, still about 7 or 8% Christian. So that they're Christian minorities, they're Jewish minorities, and there were Jews all over the Middle East long before Zionism. Now, I'm going to say very briefly, because I don't believe that the main problem in the Middle East is Zionism. It's a sore, and it's a reason for everybody to be able to be angry and to displace the real problems that they're having. In the 1890s, a journalist, not very successful journalist in Vienna by the name of Theodor Herzl, started the Zionist organization. And the Zionist organization didn't get very far, and the vast majority of Jews in the world wanted to assimilate, particularly in Germany and, of course, in the United States. They did not want to go back to Palestine at all. But during World War I, Chaim Weizmann, who was a chemist teaching at the University of Liverpool, or Manchester, I've forgotten which, gave the British several formula for dyestuffs, which the Germans had dominated before the war. It's one of the reasons you had khaki color in army uniforms, is that was about the only color that the British had during World War I. And he gave them dyestuffs and so forth. And they wanted to reward him, and they offered to make him Lord Weizmann. And he said, no, I want you to support Zionism. He himself was personally interested in Zionism. So they put out something called the Balfour Declaration. Now, the Balfour Declaration is a beautiful example of diplomatic double talk. It says, we, the British government, view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a Jewish homeland as Jewish as France is French, with the understanding that the rights and security of any persons now living there shall not be abridged. Well, how are you going to give them a chance to take over a land where 500,000 people lived and still not cause any abridgment on their rights? So it was a double talk to start with. But when you hear the Balfour Declaration given to you in a newspaper anyway, they always forget that last part. And that's the important part. But the other thing to remember about the Balfour Declaration is that at the same time, the Zionists had come up with a phrase called a land with no people for a people with no land. And they repeated that millions and millions and millions and millions of times till people actually thought that Palestine had no people. And many people will tell you today that all of the people who call themselves Palestinians today came there because the Jews came there, and they came there to work with them and to benefit by their presence. That simply is not true. There were 500,000 Palestinians there, and there were about 10,000 Jews there in 1900. Between World War I and 1932, more Zionists left Palestine than entered. But after 1932, what happened in 1932? Adolf Hitler, Nazism. After 1932, the many Jews began to come in. By 1948, there were 500,000. Still, by that time, there were 1,200,000 or 1.5 million Arabs. So, and since then, you all know the story of what's happened since then. I won't go into that because that would take at least 6 months continuous talk to discuss the whole Palestine question. But the point is that this is an almost insolvable problem. But for 60 years, the world has been trying to make peace in Palestine. or peace for Israel.